Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Crown and today we are going to have some more stories that I hope that you will enjoy. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now, without further ado, let's go! First story. Mess with my kids? It's gonna cost you a pretty penny and get you in trouble with the law. So I've got an acquaintance, Richard, who has always been of the I know better than you school of thought. What makes it worse is that he literally received his PhD in physics from one of my country's top universities about 6 months ago. So he's not a dummy. The problem is that he thinks that, because he's a physics genius, that means he knows better than everyone about everything. Just an example. My kids are in Montessori schools. This is a decision my wife and I reached together, and we're very happy with it. When we heard he went on a 30-minute rant/lecture about how we're throwing our money away and Montessori is nonsense. When I told him that I had read and even professionally translated studies proving the opposite, and gave him some real-world examples, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, and so on, he still wouldn't admit he might not be 100% correct. Not the subject of this revenge bot, so you understand the person we're dealing with. Another thing that's important to note is that Richard does not have Asperger's or anything similar. We joke about this all the time and he's been tested from here until next week. He's just a really smart, socially oblivious pain in the butt. Given all of the above, I try to limit my time with him. But unfortunately, that isn't always possible. And last week we were both at the same group buy for a friend, Jack, who was visiting back home from overseas. I've known Jack since grade school, so we brought our families and made it more than just a long time no see type of thing. At some point later in the afternoon, my eldest, Awesome, less than 10 years old, came to me really sad and said she wanted to go home. When I asked her why, she said that Richard had just spent 15 minutes telling her that she shouldn't eat hot dogs because they are unhealthy. And he explained what went into hot dogs and what they are made out of. Awesome is not a vegetarian, knows that the beef and chicken she eats used to be live animals, and has never professed interest in vegetarianism. At the same time, when a kid is eating a hot dog, they don't care or want to know what's inside. We spoke a bit, I calmed her down, and I told her to ignore Richard and go play with her siblings and her friends. Being a kid, she was thankfully easily distracted by something else and moved on. I did not want to make a fuss with Jack or with Richard, so I just let it be. This turned out to be a mistake. About 30 minutes later, I heard Awesome scream and began crying. I ran over to her and Richard had come up to her and knocked her hot dog out of her hand, saying she shouldn't eat that garbage. I handed Awesome over to my wife for damage control and I took Richard aside and told him that A, you don't ever talk to a man's kid without permission. B, you don't ever teach a man's kid without permission. And C, you sure as heck don't ever touch a man's kid without permission. He doesn't have kids, so I still wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. This turned out to be a mistake. Instead of doing the mature thing and moving on, he decided to double down on the hot dog issue. This was a hill he was going to die on. My kids shouldn't be eating hot dogs. Keeping Jack in mind, I disengaged and told him to stay the heck away from my family. For the rest of the RV, I kept my eye on him, and he did not come near them. Jack enjoyed it and we all ate some good meat. End of the story as far as I'm concerned. This turned out to be another mistake. A few days later, we received a visit from a child protection officer who claimed that we were neglecting our kids, specifically Awesome. She came in and saw that while the house could have been cleaner, what house with kids is spotless, everything was fine. She sat with Awesome for a few minutes and asked her some questions. said everything was fine, and she left. First thing I did was call a friend of mine who is a lawyer just to be on the safe side. He said it looked to him like we were in the clear, but we should keep in touch with him just in case. Next, I began working the grapevine. It turned out that Richard had been offended by how I treated him after the hot dog incident, so he filed a false anonymous report. Being Richard and never thinking he could ever be wrong, he was even talking about it as if people should be proud of him for what he did. I had to make sure though, so the last thing I did before dropping the hammer on him was confronting him personally. I set my phone to record and went to his house, and he doubled down yet again, saying we were torturing Awesome. He's the one who called protective services on us, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat. And this turned out to be a mistake. I am not the violent type, but I swear I wanted to break the son of a witch in half. I told him that if he came near myself or anyone in my family again, I'd have a restraining order put on him. And I'd make sure every single one of our shared acquaintances knew why. I listened to the recording in my car, and his admission that he filed a false report came out clear as day. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer, who said he'll have the ball rolling with some friends of his, with the public prosecutor to see if we could get Richard in trouble, using his admission. Still waiting on that. The wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes. Then I enacted my actual revenge. See, after he got his PhD, Richard bragged about his new flat he'd been moving into as soon as he sold his current flat. To that end, he renovated most of his current flat, including putting in lots of new and expensive features that required lots of electrical work. He did the same in his new flat. He did most of his electrical work himself, which is a big no-no unless you're licensed. I called in an inspector on both of his flats, who asked to see certification on who did the electrical work. Obviously, there was no certification. It wouldn't surprise me if Richard, being Richard, he began arguing with the inspector that his work was good enough and he didn't need to pay someone else to do it for him. I haven't seen or spoken to Richard since, but I've heard that he had to bring in a certified electrician to examine every single change he made in both flats, dismantling everything and having it inspected. Turns out, the buyers of his old flat weren't happy with the delay in receiving the keys, and were even unhappier when they learned why there was a delay. They walked away from the deal and are taking him to court, because his sale fell through. He's now in the hole paying mortgages on 2 flats. I don't know if there was a fine levied against him, but I sure as hell hope so. Listen to the story. You do not ever screw with a man's kids. Next story. Do not mess with Real Big Toby. I adopted a full-bred husky in the Pacific Northwest. We named him Toby, but after a while he developed the name Real Big Toby. He wasn't a huge husky or Malamute, but boy did he look beautiful, and boy was his personality real big. He had one blue eye and one brown eye, which never failed to trip people out. On top of that, he was a huge ham. Loved attention, and would actually talk to you about how his day was going. It got to the point where it was kind of stupid to put him on a leash. I would tell him to stay when I went into class, for example, and he'd be passed out or getting the chicks to scratch his belly when I came out. Every time. The dean of the college even knew him on a first-name basis and started to bring his dog in to work after watching Real Big Toby do his thing. At the time, I lived in a mountain town, attended college, and was an avid mountain biker, so having a dog that would happily and easily do 30 miles in a day was cool. He would follow us everywhere we went, and my mountain bike was my only source of transportation, so we became very in tune with one another. He was a husky after all, so you could tell when he ran that this was exactly what he was born to do. Toby was such a super good boy. He listened, paid attention, and never left my side. He had a seat designated for him on the deck at the local coffee shop, which meant you had to walk by him and try to resist giving him a scratch if you wanted to go inside. It got to the point where just about everyone in this fairly small town got to know Toby on a first-name basis. Every once in a while on mountain bike runs, we would get separated or Toby would just get sidetracked on the way down the hill. It was such a small town that, in a few times it happened, he was back with me by the end of the day. The police all knew him from around town. The pound knew him, so if anyone called, they would just give them my number. One day it happened again. He got lost on the way down the hill. Only this time he did not come back. No call, nothing for days. It got to the point where I started asking around town. If you've ever lived in a small town, you know it's hard to keep a secret. After about a week, a friend says he saw Toby and tracked the guy down and gave him my number. He never called. After searching, trying to find this guy, I finally got a breakthrough. He worked at the college. Now I'm aware how stupid people can be when they receive an animal. Toby was ripped. You can see his muscles bulging out of his fur. He didn't have an ounce of fat on him because you guessed it. He was in excellent shape. I fed him mostly a raw diet, and what kibble he did get was the best you could buy. The first thing out of this guy's mouth was to tell me that he's keeping my dog. You don't take care of him. You don't even feed him, and he's such a good boy. He will better off with me. And I became enraged. Well, like I mentioned, he worked at the school I attended. I also mentioned that Dean hammed it up with Toby on a nearly daily basis. I didn't mention I had the Dean's home number though. So a call Saturday morning resulted in Toby being returned to me later that day. This guy had the nerve to, along with Toby, bring me a 50-pound bag of the worst store brand of dog food you could buy. I bought you this so you could feed him. Rage. Utter rage. Come to find out, this guy was in charge of a research project for the school. It was very easy to figure out where his office was. I went to his office with a plan of returning his food and chewing him out in front of his colleagues. He wasn't at his desk, so I did the most natural thing I could possibly do. I turned the 50-pound bag of dog food upside down on his desk, computer, and stacks of paper to the point where it formed the perfect mountain on top of his keyboard. Truly an awesome sight. Knowing loose lips sink ships, I did not tell anyone but my close friends. The school brought misconduct charges against me. The hearing was in front of a board of other students and staff, and well, I don't know what happened to the bag of dog food. I was telling the story to a bunch of guys and one of them asked me for the bag. That's the last I saw of it. And all charges were dropped. That jerk that tried to steal real Big Toby had it much worse though. 50 freaking pounds of dog food on top of your research project. It turns out, doesn't bode well with management. For reasons unknown, 2 days later he was fired from the college. Not only did they fire him, but put a restraining order on him and had to change the locks to the building. Seriously though, do not mess with real Big Toby. Next story. You want me to coerce an inspector after someone else did the work? This happened years ago. I had just started working as an independent electrician, and one day I received a call from a new customer. He was one of those people that flips homes in lower income neighborhoods. I'll call him Todd, but honestly, I've forgotten what his name is. Todd asked me to meet him at a vacant house he recently bought to give him an estimate for a full rewiring job. He was 30 minutes late, so I was already unimpressed with him. Upon entering the house, which was right after a rainstorm had passed through, we found an inch of water covering the hard wood floors. There was water pouring out of small holes in the columns on the front porch. Everything was soaked. And instead of showing me around, Todd called his business partner and brother and spent the next 20 minutes cursing him for not fixing the roof. I'm standing around and listening to his man-baby rage on full display. The whole time I'm thinking there is no way I'm going to work for this guy. His fuse was way too short and his anger was out of hand. I gave him a price, which admittedly was the I don't want to do this job price, and didn't hear back from him until months later. Todd called me later that year, and he explained that he had found an electrician from 3 states away, and had paid the electrician with ceramic tiles instead of cash. The problem now? Well, he needed an inspection from the city electrical inspector. I agreed to meet the inspector for him, which I would bill him for. I went back to the house about 20 minutes before the inspector showed up and saw numerous issues. When the inspector arrived and walked through together, every issue I saw, the inspector also saw. He pointed them out, and every time I agreed with him that the work was not up to code. This inspector kept looking at me with a puzzled expression. After we did a complete walkthrough, I finally explained to the inspector that I did not do any of the work and was hired to get him to pass the inspection. He asked me if I thought he should, and I told him absolutely not. I got paid for my time, I got paid to repair all the violations, and I formed a strong relationship with that inspector, who was always lenient with me on all of my future jobs. Next story. My HOA will learn that I absolutely live by the letter of the law. My HOA recently changed the rules limiting the amount of vehicles allowed in my driveway. I collect cars, all of which run, drive, and are registered and insured. And my household also has 4 licensed drivers. When I moved in, the rule stated only 1 Class C vehicle allowed per driveway. Well, that was fine by me since Class C vehicles do not exist. Class C vehicles were not defined in the HOA rules either. I assume whoever wrote that rule assumed since they had a Class C license, standard cars and trucks must be Class C. So I moved in, and after stuffing 2 cars, 4 motorcycles, and my camper in my garage, I placed 5 vehicles in my driveway. The letters came. I was quickly able to deflate them after asking them for the legal definition of a Class C vehicle. No fines paid. Fast forward about a year and the HOA proposed a rule change, now stating 3 vehicles per driveway maximum. Since 3 is more than 1 and people lack critical thinking skills, it was passed with over 85% support. Fine, 3 vehicles it is. I did some digging and found the street in my HOA were turned over to the city, an effort to avoid having to foot the maintenance bill, I'm sure. And as such, the HOA had no authority to stop people from parking on a public street. So I moved 2 vehicles onto my very narrow street. 1 in front of my house, and 1 directly across the street in front of my neighbor's house. Now the only vehicles that could safely drive past my house were motorcycles, and the one guy was a smart car. It was glorious. My street is a main artery into and out of the neighborhood. Lots of U-turns and backtracking for folks to get home or to work. They are the ones who did the rest of the work for me. Complaints and calls to the HOA president resulted in another rule change vote. Now my driveway is open to any amount of legally registered vehicles. It fits 9. I need more cars. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.